All right, sample problem 1.9 from Chapter 1 says that we're going to be determining the number of significant figures. So the rules for doing this can be found on page 28 in the textbook. And so it's very important that you know these rules and memorize them for whenever you're doing any kind of calculations in any science course. Things always have to be reported to the correct number of significant figures. And again, those rules are going to be on page 28. Now, something also to note that I think is very important is you don't have to think about significant figures until the very end of a calculation. So you can keep all of the significant figures in your calculator until the very end, until you're ready to report the answer. But anyways, let's go ahead and work this problem using those rules on page 28. It says, for each of the following quantities, underline the zeros that are significant figures and determine the number of significant figures in each quantity. For D to F, express each in exponential notation first. You also may hear this called scientific notation. And for extra practice on this, I have listed in the Canvas modules page a file for you to get some extra practice if you need it for scientific notation. All right, so let's see. We're going to start with A, okay? And I'm going to follow these rules. It says first I have to make sure that the measurement has a decimal point. And there it is. It does have a decimal point. And then I got to start at the left and then move right until I reach the first non-zero point. So the first non-zero point from left to right is this 3 here. It says count that digit and every digit to its right as significant. So I've got 1, 2. Right? And so I need to underline that 0 because it's significant. The problem wanted me to underline that one, so I'm going to underline it. And then I also have to determine the number of significant figures in each quantity, and it is 1, 2, right? That following the rules, it said count everything past that as significant. So I've got 1, 2 of those. So I'm going to put 2, and a lot of times you'll see this abbreviated as sig figs. And that just abbreviates significant figures. All right, so let's see. Let's go on to B part, and I'm going to follow those rules again. I'm going to make sure there's a decimal point, and there it is. And then I'm going to start left, move to the right until I get to the first non-zero, and then count everything to the right of that as significant. 1, 2, 3, 4. So all of those are significant, and I need to underline all the zeros that are significant. So I'm going to underline that 0 there. And now I'm going to write for B, there are 4 sig figs. Okay, and now let's look at C. So I got to figure out, is there a decimal point? And in this one, there's not a decimal point. It says, so I got to look at the rules. It says if there is no decimal point, we assume that the zeros are not significant unless exponential notation clarifies the quantity. And it says if there is a decimal point, then the zeros lie either after or before it. They are significant. And then it also says a terminal point indicates that zeros are significant. Okay. So let's see. I don't have a decimal point here, but that doesn't matter because, you know, so now I'm going to go to the left and start. And I come to the first non-zero, which is this one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 significant figures in this one. And I got to underline that 1, 0 there because that one is significant because it's in between two numbers. All right, now I'm going to move on to D. Now this starts where we have to add that extra thing in. We have to write it in scientific notation. But first, let's determine our significant figure. So I'm starting over here to the left, and I'm going to go to the right until I get 1 to the first 0 there, non-zero number. And there it is, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 4 significant figures, and no zeros are significant, so I'm not going to underline any of those. So 4 sig figs. And now I'm going to write this thing in scientific notation. So let me go through the rules of scientific notation really quickly. You have to write a number that is between 1 and 10. It can't be greater than 10. So I guess I really should say 1 and 9. It can't be greater than 10. And then you use exponents to identify, which way and how many times the decimal place is supposed to move. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this number into a number between 1 and 10. And so that's going to be 4.715. I also have to be sure I've got the correct number of significant figures here. And I do, right? It's 4 sig figs. We just determined that, and I have 4 figures written. Now I have to write times 10 raised to some power. And to figure out the power, you just count how many times you move the decimal place. And so let's see, here's the decimal place, and I had to move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my power is going to be 5. Now I have to determine the sign of my power. Is it going to be negative or positive? If you move it to the right, it's going to be negative. If I were to have moved it to the left, it would have been positive. So since I moved this one to the right, my power is negative 5, and then I also have to include my unit of meters there. Alright, now let's move on to E. I have to note, is there a decimal point? Yes, there is. Right there it is. Come to my first non-zero and then count everything past that as significant. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I need to underline both of those zeros there because they are significant. And I need to write down that I have 5 sig figs. And now I have to write this thing in scientific notation. So I've got to convert it to a number between 1 and 10. So it's going to be 5.76. And now I need 5 significant figures in this, so I've got to add those zeros. They are significant. So both of those zeros have to go times 10 to some power. So let's count how many times we had to move our decimal place. I had to move it 1, 2, 3, 4. And I moved it to the left, so that means it's going to be positive 4. And then I include my unit of seconds. Now let's look at our last one there, F. Alright, I had to give us some more room to write. So F. I've got to find my decimal. There it is. Go to the right until I come to the first non-zero. There it is. And then count everything past that as significant. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 4 sig figs. This 0 here is the significant one, so I'm underlining that. And now I got to write it in scientific notation. So I'm going to convert that number to a number between 1 and 10, and so that's going to be 7.160. And I have 4 significant figures there, so I'm good, times 10 raised to some power. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I had to move it 7 times to the right, so that's negative 7 centimeters cubed.